Okay, this is Chapter 9. This is the 9th week. We're going to talk about cognition and perception. We're mostly going to be talking about the difference between the philosophies of the East and the philosophies of the West. And it is Chapter 9. Okay, what I want you to really look at in this picture is the rabbit, the puppy, and the carrot. Now, if you were asked to categorize these three things, how would you put them together? Would you put the two mammals together and the vegetable? So the carrot the rabbit and the dog are both mammals, therefore that you'd put them together, or maybe you'd put the carrot and the rabbit together because the rabbit eats carrots. It's just how in the world would you do this? When stimuli are grouped according to the perceived similarity of their attributes, it is called a taxonomic categorization strategy. So a taxonomic categorization strategy would be mammals, put the dog and the rabbit together, or mammals and or animals and their food. You'd put the carrot and the rabbit together. So that's putting something together with something else. That's a taxonomic categorization strategy. Taxonomic categorization answers are especially common among Westerners, and of course, one of the reasons that we're looking at this is because this is a Western topic. The book was written by a Canadian. It's cultural psychology. So yeah, we're putting we're looking to categorize these three things. Thematic categorization strategies where stimuli are grouped together on the basis of causal, temporal, or spatial relationships. Therapeutic categorization is especially common in East Asia. This difference in categorization strategies reflects an underlying difference in the ways that people attend to their worlds. Analytic thinking is characterized by a focus on objects and their attributes. Objects are perceived as existing independently from their context. They are understood in terms of their component parts. Context is very important. The attributes that make up objects are used as a basis for categorizing them, and a set of fixed abstract rules is used to predict and explain the behavior of these objects. Analytic thinking is more common in Western countries than in China, Japan, and Korea. And this is one of the reasons when they started writing mystery stories using a Chinese, when Charlie Chan was very popular, his way of looking at things was very much different from the Western perspective. And of course they found that fascinating. And of course, the same thing happened with Fu Manchu and whatnot. And then, of course, we fought World War II. Charlie Chan was real popular before World War II, and as was the many faces of Fu Manchu. Fu Manchu was a criminal, and of course, Charlie Chan was a detective in Hawaii, from Hawaii. I guess he eventually ended up in California for some reason. Anyway, it was his different way of looking at things, and of course that has to do with Eastern philosophy as compared to Western philosophy. Holistic thinking is characterized by an orientation to the context as a whole. It represents an associative way of thinking, which gives attention to the relationship among the objects and surrounding context. In holistic thinking, objects are understood in terms of how they relate to the rest of the context, and their behavior is predicted and explained on the basis of those relationships. Holistic thinking also emphasizes knowledge gained through experience rather than the application of fixed abstract rules. Holistic thinking is more common in East Asia. So analytic thinking is more common in the Western world, and holistic thinking is more common in the Eastern world. Analytic thinkers tend to show field independence. They can separate objects from their background fields. Holistic thinkers tend to show field dependence. They tend to view objects as bound to their backgrounds. And of course, if we look at these two pictures, it looks like this lady is a head and legs and two hands, but of course she's holding a mirror. Anyway, and this is a picture, and if you look at it long enough, you can see Michael Jackson back here. East Asians have been socialized from such a young age to attend to relationships that they do so unconsciously scanning scenes. Now you've got to understand that in Asia, of course, it's very, very crowded. It's been crowded for thousands of years. Lots of people. And because of that, the relationships are extremely important. So how you get along with your neighbors is extremely important. In the Western world, and one of the reasons that the Western world has tried to expand throughout the world is because they see the world differently. They don't see it as relationships. They see it as something that needs to be controlled. I don't know how to explain this, and that's one of the reasons why Westerners keep wandering or had kept wandering all over the world, because they were trying to expand themselves. The Eastern world not so much. Western world a great deal. Westerners have been socialized to attend to focal objects, and they thus habitually tend to direct their attention at such objects. So in the Eastern world, people are looking at relationships, and that's one of the reasons why they are collectivistic. So if we're talking about a village in China, the individuals are trying to get along with everybody else in the village. In the United States or in the Western world, not so much. You're really not thinking about all the other people in your village. You're thinking more about yourself and how you fit in with whatever. But you are the most important thing to you. And in a collectivist society, of course, the group is more important than the individual. And of course, that's the way they see things. So when they created art in the East, it was very much different from art in the West. Looking at the art of East Asia, we can see that the art is very different from Western art. East Asian art is painted with higher horizon, creating more context in the picture. In their portraits, the background is much more complex, and the figures in the paintings are smaller than in Western art. And as you can see, we have tiny little people here, but we can see what's going on in the background. Now, the interesting thing is, if you go to China, you go to Japan, you go to Korea, you don't see this. It's really quite crowded, and it's fairly overpopulated. So you don't see wilderness like what you're seeing here. And that's one of the reasons, I've talked to you about this before. It's one of the reasons why the individual is mostly in the mind. That's where you find your peace. You're not going to find your peace in nature, because nature is too crowded and there are too many people. We've seen pictures of the Japanese subways where they have pushers who actually shove people into the cars so that they can pack them in tighter, as weird as that is. And of course, here's a Chinese picture of a woman sitting and meditating, and as you can see, we get to see what's behind her as well as see her. And of course, the same thing. This is a photograph from China, and as you can see, it's very complex. This is another picture painted. This is Japanese, I think. This is Japanese and this is Chinese. or both of these are Japanese. I'm sorry. And as you can see, there's it's quite extensive, and the people are relatively small. The people are not nearly as important as the clothes that they're wearing in this picture. And of course, the Western world a little bit different. It's not really the context, it's the people. The people are the focal point. And this picture, I'm not sure the people are very important. People are certainly not important in this picture. The background may be more important in that picture. And of course, people are certainly not important. Is the lady more important, or is her clothes and the screen that she's sitting in front of more important? Masuda and Gonzalez and colleagues in 2008 had American and East Asian students draw landscapes with a person, a river, a tree, a house, and a horizon. They were seeking to see the difference between the two groups, and this is what a Westerner would do. This is how they would create their pictures. As you can see, not much horizon, lots of houses. The people are the focal point in most of these pictures, along with a car. It's like the same car. Anyway. East Asians drew the horizon that was significantly higher in the picture than it was for Americans. East Asians tended to provide a more complex background in their drawings. East Asians included 75% contextual objects than did the Americans. East Asians were more likely than Americans to situate their objects in context. And as you can see, this is an East Asian picture. This is Rich that did that one. As you can see, here's the person right here. The person is almost inconsequential compared to all the other mess around them, the context. When East Asians take photographs of others, they tend to include more background. They also tend to have smaller figures in their portraits compared to Americans. And these are Asian pictures. Ladies in the middle, she's the most important thing in this picture. Well, maybe not. The baby and the puppy, are they the most important thing in the picture? Well, maybe not. Little girl, but we see so much background in this picture. And of course, this is an American picture, and these are American pictures as well. The children are more important. There's a school bus in the background, but you could hardly tell it. The people are the most important thing in the pictures. When Masada and Gonzalez and colleagues in 2008 looked at American and East Asian Facebook pages, they found that East Asian photos had smaller figures and larger backgrounds compared to American photos. And here we go again. As you can see, lots of background, lots of context in the back. The individuals are almost not as important as the backgrounds. As weird as this is, I apologize. She's just got her underwear on. But as you can see, lots of background, lots of context. Lots of background, lots of context. These are all Asian pictures. Looking at Japanese photographs of buildings, researchers discovered that these photographs had more boundary structures than American photographs. More boundary, there you go. This is a Japanese building. Lots of boundaries. Physical landscapes from Japan are literally busier than landscapes in the United States. And you can see what a mess we're talking about. Look at all the lines in these pictures. And this is an American picture, of course. That's a church in the United States. That's the U.S. Capitol building. And we have, this is an old schoolhouse. And that is a picture. And there we go. That's a Chrysler building in New York. Since cities in East Asia tend to be more crowded than Western cities, Living in the busier physical environment fosters the ability to attend to a lot more information at once. When they look at how scientists from East Asia present their findings on posters, they had busier posters. They had busier posters. They had busier. They had busier posters with more words than North American participants. Sorry about that. I was trying to keep my cats from fighting. This is an American poster. This is what an American poster looks like. Let me show you what an Asian poster looks like. There you go. I've been to conferences and I've looked at these posters. The ones from and of course, if somebody from China or Japan or Korea looked at this poster, they'd say, well, you didn't have very much to say. This is the way they want to see their posters, as weird as that is. And you can see that these guys, you can see all these. This is a Chinese poster. You can see how involved it is. Researchers looked at government and university websites in East Asia and North America. The Asian websites were much longer than the North American websites and had significantly more links and words. The East Asian websites were busier with more information for people to navigate. Researchers discovered that Westerners were more likely to explain people's behaviors in terms of their underlying dispositions, while East Asians and possibly people from other cultures were more likely to explain people's behaviors in terms of contextual variables. When people from India and the United States were asked to describe a person, the Americans were more likely to describe people in abstract personality traits, and Indians described people in concrete behaviors they observed. She is friendly. She brings cake to my family on festival days. Researchers analyzing news stories of murders in the United States, China, and Japan discovered that East Asian papers described murders in situational terms. The murderer had a rivalry with another student. They had been recently fired. The American reports tried to interpret the situation from a dispositional point of view. The murderer had a very bad temper. The shooter was described as mentally unstable. And of course, we see this with mass shootings. We try to come up with a psychological reason as to why this individual has done what they did. A good example is the shooter in Las Vegas. It took us months to come up with a rationale as to why this individual started popping away at the individuals at the concert down below his hotel room. You know, the fact that we were trying to come up with rational reasons, and of course, the fact that he had lost money recently, that didn't really sit very well with anybody. It was what we wanted to know, what his psychological makeup was. Personality information is not seen as equally important for explaining the behavior of others in all cultural contexts. Westerners tend to use personality information more for understanding others and themselves than East Asians do. People from many other non-Western cultures show a pattern of focusing on situation rather than disposition, similar to East Asians. Religious groups differ in their attributions as well. American Protestants are more likely than American Catholics to make dispositional attributions. This difference between sects appears to be a function of Protestants having a greater commitment to the idea that people have individual souls. And of course, this is a picture. These are the Catholics and these are the Protestants. And as you can see, they have different clothes on, and all kinds of interesting things are taking place in that picture. The Protestant example of a Protestant would be a Methodist, an Episcopalian, a Baptist. I think Mormons are considered to be Protestants. Of course, the Catholic Church is the Catholic Church. There's only one Catholic Church in the United States, but there are a lot of Protestant sects in the United States. If people believe that people are judging them on the basis of what their soul has done, it follows that they are more likely to view the soul as being the cause of the individual's behavior. This is a joke, and for those of you who are religious, I apologize. I just thought it was pretty funny. Jesus is coming. Look busy. Anyway. People's socioeconomic status predicts the kinds of attributions that people make. Working class Americans make more situational attributions and fewer dispositional attributions than middle class Americans. The same kind of class differences in explaining other people's behaviors have also been found in France. The same kind of class differences in explaining other people's behaviors have also been found in Russia. The same kind of class differences in explaining other people's behaviors have also been found in India. So what are we talking about here? What we're saying is that working class people have this same way of looking at things than do middle class people. Situational, he got in the fight because he was drunk. That's something a working class person might say, but in the same situation, a middle class person might say something like, he's a drunk and therefore he got in a fight. So he's always getting drunk and he's always fighting. And the working class person would say, it's not his fault. He killed her. Yeah, sure, he killed her, but it wasn't his fault. He was drunk. And of course, the middle class person would say, well, he's an alcoholic and therefore he needs to be put away for an extended length of time. Disposition, this is the way he acts. This is the way he is. And the working class person is more likely to make an excuse for what has happened. It's situational rather than a common trait for that individual. And of course, differences between the working class and middle class people in France would be the same in Russia and in India. If analytic thinkers tend to view the world as operating to a set of universal abstract rules and laws, they will apply these rules and laws when trying to make sense of a situation. This is termed rule-based reasoning, and of course, as Westerners, we have rule-based reasoning. Holistic thinkers should be more likely to make sense of a situation by considering the relationships among the objects and the events. They should look for evidence of events clustering together, such as similarity among events, or of temporal contiguity of events. This is termed associative reasoning. And of course, this is the reason why Charlie Chan could solve crimes that Western detectives weren't able to solve, because he was more of a holistic thinker, and he had associative reasoning. Westerners appear to view change as occurring in linear ways. Change appears in static and predictable ways. Stocks rise after an election. Stocks will rise in 2020. East Asians believe that change happens in fluid and unpredictable ways. And therefore, Easterners are less likely to try to predict what's going to happen in the future. They see things as fluid and unpredictable, whereas Westerners try to see things as patterns. One of the favorite phrases of people in the West is that if you don't study history, then history will repeat itself. But of course, as far as the Asians are concerned, they don't even think of the world that way. They don't see things repeating themselves, because as far as they're concerned, the world is fluid and quite unpredictable. This is a Chinese story of unpredictability. One day an old farmer, this is in China of course, one day an old farmer's horse ran away from him. His neighbors came by to comfort him, but he said, "How can you know this isn't a good thing?" A few days later, his horse came back bringing a wild horse with it. His neighbors came to congratulate the old man, who said, "How can you know this isn't a bad thing?" A few weeks later, the old farmer's son was trying to ride the wild horse and fell off, breaking his leg. When the neighbors came over to express condolences, the old man said, "How can you know this isn't a good thing?" The next month, a war broke out, and all the able-bodied young men were recruited to fight it. The old farmer's son did not have to go because of his broken leg, and he survived with his father, whereas all the able-bodied young men went to war and all of them died. Unpredictability. So some things that look bad might be good, and some things that look good might actually be bad. East Asians have been shown to place more value on things that have happened in the past compared with the future. The opposite is found in North Americans. Attitudes toward the future vary across cultures, and East Asians have quite different expectations and predictions about the future compared with Westerners. Creativity is a generation of ideas that are novel and useful and appropriate. Westerners prefer novel objects more than East Asians do. They generate a larger number of ideas when they are primed with individualistic thoughts than collectivistic ones, and Asian Americans show more divergent thinking when primed with American culture compared with Asian culture. The novelty part of the equation appears to be facilitated by individualism and Western cultural experiences. In other words, we like things that are different. We want to see novelty in the West. Asians, they want to see everything the same, which makes a lot of sense, because if you think of Westerners as individuals, we want to wear clothes that are not the same as everybody else's. We want to stand out, whereas Asians, they want to wear the same clothes as everybody else because they don't want to stand out. It's not a positive thing as far as Asians are concerned. Good creative ideas involve novel solutions that are appropriate for the problem at hand. Collectivism appears to be associated with the generation of useful rather than novel ideas. In collective contexts, people are socialized to be concerned about the opinions of others and to find solutions that will fit the goals of the members of the group. So if we were looking for novel ideas, if we were looking for good ideas, we would probably be better off if we stuck with individuals rather than a collectivist society. And that's exactly what the research is going to show. When Singaporeans were assigned to work together, researchers discovered that they were more likely to comment on appropriateness of their ideas than when they worked by themselves. Their ideas had become less original in groups. And of course, we know where Singapore is. Singapore is at the bottom of Malaysia. It's over there by India, and it's south of India and China. It is an East Asian culture. When the same research was done in Israel, they found that the Israelis were not affected by the presence of others in the same way. When the same research was done in the Netherlands, they found that the Dutch were not affected by the presence of others in the same way. When the same research was done in Korea, they found that the Koreans reacted more similarly to the Singaporeans than the Israelis and the Dutch. In other words, they were trying to make everybody happy. And because of that, they had less novel ideas. The Israelis and the Dutch, they had more novel ideas. More collectivistic East Asian cultures, with their emphasis on useful ideas, are more likely to foster incremental innovations, whereas more individualistic Western cultures, with their emphasis on novel ideas, encourage more breakthrough ideas, like the car plane. Japan is the world leader in terms of number of patents it receives each year. Most of their patents represent incremental improvements, particularly in telecommunications, information technology, and electronics. And as you can see, these are people on the subway. They're trying to sleep on the subway. And this one has a chin. I don't know what that is. This is a hat that holds your head up. Talking and language have held a privileged position in much of Western intellectual history. Among the ancient Greeks, Homer concluded that there was no greater skill than to be a good debater. And Socrates thought that knowledge existed within people and could be revealed only through verbal reasoning. And of course, that's the Western idea. In Judeo-Christian beliefs, the word was viewed as sacred because of the divine power to create. In the United States, the freedom to speak one's mind is a birthright protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. Speaking is valued in the West because it is viewed as an act of self-expression and as inextricably bound to thought. In East Asian culture, traditions, there has been less emphasis on talking, if not outright suspicion of the spoken word. This is a Laotian proverb. Laos is over by Vietnam. Listen with one ear, be suspicious with the other. That's an old Laotian proverb. Lao Tzu wrote, "He who knows does not speak. He who speaks does not know." In other words, this is the silent elder, of course. He is so knowledgeable because he won't tell you anything. He doesn't say anything, and that makes him more knowledgeable. The people who and we've seen this with salesmen. They just talk and talk and talk and try to talk you into doing something, and of course, all they're trying to do is sell you something, trying to sell you a bill of goods. Practitioners of many Eastern religions pursue truth through silent meditation rather than through spoken prayer. A Korean proverb states, "An empty cart makes more noise." In other words, if you've got an empty head, you're more likely to talk. Eastern culture traditions have not cultivated the belief that thought and speech are closely related. Japanese mothers have been shown to speak less to their children than American mothers. Chinese infants as young as 7 months have been shown to vocalize less in response to laboratory events than European American infants. And if you think of your own babies, they started talking almost in sentences, even though they weren't saying anything. They sounded like sentences, at 7, 8, 9 months. Much of what is communicated in the course of a conversation goes beyond the actual words that are used and is expressed in nonverbal gestures, facial expressions, and voice tone. People seem to be easier to upset in an email than when you are face-to-face with them. They can't see your smile and wink. So they can't see your facial expressions, and because of that, people misinterpret emails a lot more frequently than they misinterpret a face-to-face communication. People often resort to adding emoticons or abbreviations to their email or text messages to add the nonverbal contextual cues that are lacking in emails and text messages. And of course, there's lots of emoticons. Nonverbal communication is important in all cultures, but there are some rather pronounced cultural differences in the degree to which communication relies on explicit verbal information versus more implicit nonverbal cues. In high context cultures, people are deeply involved with each other, and this involvement leads them to have much shared information that guides their behavior. Much of what is to be communicated can be inferred because people have a great deal of information in common that they can rely on, and thus they can be less explicit in what they say. And something like this happened to me this weekend. Or this week, since I'm not down there, I'm starting to have people are starting to misinterpret my emails. When I was down in Saili, and I was communicating with people on campus, when I was walking around and they were seeing me, they would know that I joke a lot and I tease a lot. So they didn't take offense at a lot of things I said, and sometimes, I'm just kidding, just trying to loosen things up a little bit. And this week I wrote an email, and it was and there were some jokes in there, and people became offended because I was joking about a serious topic. Well, that's the way I do things. Anyway, if I had been down there and I had talked to that individual, they probably wouldn't have become nearly as offended because they know how frequently I tease, and I don't really mean offense. My cats are fighting again. East Asians are good examples of high context cultures. Western and English-speaking countries are generally good examples of low context cultures. What is conveyed in verbal communication in East Asian languages is less explicit than what is communicated in English. And this is really kind of interesting, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of times Asians and Americans have a difficult time interacting with one another. A good example would be if a Japanese lady went to a bar and there were a bunch of GIs there. Of course, the GIs have whatever they have on their mind, and let's assume that it is to find a girlfriend. The Asians, the Japanese ladies may be there just to practice their English. And one of the complaints about Americans is that we say a lot of things, but a lot of what we say doesn't mean anything. And of course, that's just the way Americans are. They fill they would rather fill the air with noise than they would make a lot of sense. And Asians, of course, are the very opposite. They don't have anything to say. They won't say anything. So as you can see from this picture, this is a Japanese lady and this is an American, and he's got all of these. He's saying an awful lot of stuff, but he's not actually communicating anything. It's really kind of interesting. Now we're going to get into why the Japanese are having so much trouble with American GIs right now. The words that are said in Japan are often less important than the way that they are said. If you've ever been around Japanese people, a lot of times they will never tell you no. That's too insulting. That's too embarrassing. They won't say no to you. They may mean no, but they won't say no because that's just not part of their culture. Now, normally in Japan, you can tell what somebody means by their facial expressions. So even if what they're trying to do is save face, and the way to save face is not to ever say no. So it gets kind of interesting. And this is the reason that American soldiers have such a difficult time dealing with locals in Japan and Okinawa and whatnot. And we've had just tons and tons of problems. The Marines have actually been kicked off of Japan. There are no Marine bases left on Japan because there were so many cases of them assaulting Japanese women. And the reason it was not as much an assault as it was that they misinterpreted what the lady meant. He thought that she meant that she was willing to have sex with him or whatever. And the reality was because of her cultural context, she was telling him no, and he was hearing the words, but he wasn't seeing the expressions. A pause and a strained look on the face of a Japanese speaker communicates that the information they have is dissatisfying no matter what the words they use. And they're always trying to save face. They never want to embarrass the person that they're talking to. So they may tell them what sounds like yes, but which, because of the way that they communicate it, it means no. The key information is conveyed non-verbally, with the content of the words sometimes being rather empty. And of course, if you've ever watched a movie, a good example is the Tom Selleck movie that came out in the 90s. It was a movie called Mr. Baseball. And if you wanted, that's a really good cultural movie because it really explains how Americans can misunderstand the Japanese and how the Japanese culture is very structured. At one point, Tom Selleck is asking his handler if he should date this woman, and the guy tells him there are many difficulties in this relationship, and he takes it as at face value, at the word value, and he doesn't understand this lady, that he shouldn't come anywhere close to this lady. But of course he dates her, and it turns out to be the manager's son or daughter. I'm sorry. Anyway, since so much is conveyed through nonverbal communication by the Japanese, they tend to have far more trouble leaving messages on answering machines. They're more selective of their wording because they are visualizing how the person on the other end is receiving their messages. And for this reason, they don't like to leave messages on answering machines, because it is they can't control how the person's going to interpret it. And that is the end of the chapter. Fascinating chapter. Okay, so you guys need to write a paper. The paper has to have to do with another culture. If you have any trouble finding a book or finding something to write about, if you've got a culture that you're interested in, but you can't find a book, communicate with me, because I was an English major. My undergraduate degree is in English. I'm really interested in this kind of stuff. I've got a whole box of books back in my office in Saley, but of course I'm not there to distribute them. But I'll be glad to help you find a book if you tell me what culture you're looking for. If you're interested in Mongolia, I've got a book about Mongolia. You know, I probably ought to send you guys that list of books that I have. Of course, I don't know how you're going to get a hold of them. We can't go on campus. Even if I were there, we wouldn't be allowed to go on campus. So it might be difficult. But if worse comes to worse, I'll find you a book to read. Just tell me what culture you're looking for if you haven't found one already. As I said, it needs to be another culture. It can't be the Western culture. It can be the drug culture. It can be the cowboy culture. It can be the military culture. I've got books about that. What else? It can be another native culture. If you can find a book about another culture, about another tribe. You know, whatever you're interested in, we'll see what we can do. Just give me the word, and I'll send you something. I'll try to figure something out. So stay safe, and I'll see you next week for Chapter 10. And let me turn this thing off.